very good morning and a very good afternoon to all our attendees from all over the world. I can see the numbers are going up rapidly. Thank you all very much for joining. On behalf of JCU's Deputy Vice Chancellor and Campus Dean, I'm delighted to welcome all of you to this SITBA JCU webinar on the future of retailing. My name is Malobi Mukherjee. I'm a lecturer of business here in JCU, and I'll be the moderator and host for this event. As you can all see, we have a stellar panel together today, and we are really very fortunate to bring our panelists together. It's taken a while, but we are here now. And we are also very fortunate to have our Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Chris Rudd, OBE, to introduce the panelists to our attendees. So without further ado, I'm going to request Professor Rudd to kindly come on board to introduce our panelists for the session.
Yeah, Malobi, many thanks for that, and a warm welcome to everybody joining us this afternoon, if indeed it is afternoon where you are. I know that we got at least one participant from the UK, so if you are enjoying an early morning or a late evening, then you're all the more welcome. You know, it is one of the things with this new way of operating that there are some great things that have come out of it. And one of those is that we are learning, I think, to be a bit more adventurous in the way that we're patching international experts together from all over the world to contribute to events like this. And so I'm really glad, Malobi, that you've reached out in such a spectacular way to secure some of the brightest talents on the circuit. So James Cook University Singapore, very proud to be hosting, very proud to see our Centre for International Trade in Asia, SITBA, once more putting its mark on the international business agenda. And so with no more ado, Malobi, let me just introduce both you and our wonderful speakers. So Malobi is a relatively new arrival in Singapore. She's a lecturer in our business school, but as you can see today, really making her mark on the local community. We've also got Andal Alwan, who is the regional head Asia Pacific at Infosys, being responsible for consumer goods, retail and logistics. We have Prashant Nayak, who is the Vice President Global Security for Asia Pacific and the Middle East at Walt Disney, no less. And then last but by no means least, welcome to Dr. Richard Cuthbertson, who is Research Director at the Oxford Institute of Retail Management at Said Business School, University of Oxford. So a warm welcome to all of you. Really looking forward to hearing your insights, your ideas, and your sharing and the ensuing discussion, which I very much will stay for. So thank you, Malobi, and back to the studio.
Thank you very much, Professor Rudd. Thank you for that warm welcome and words of encouragement. We really appreciate it. I am truly excited, and I was thinking to myself, this has been a bit of a baptism by fire, and I've created that for myself, doing my first webinar, and that too, while we are in a pandemic situation and doing it online. Nevertheless, we got here. I'm really excited. And we're going to crack on very shortly. But before I do, just a couple of quick housekeeping rules for all our attendees. We are hosting this webinar under the Chatham House rules, which essentially means that participants are free to use the information that they receive, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speakers or of their organizations are to be revealed at any point in time. The webinar will be recorded, and we will be sharing it with the public once our panelists have approved it. And there will be an opportunity to ask questions to our panelists after the discussion. Please do type your questions in the chat box. And please do not forget to answer the satisfaction poll at the end of the discussion, so we know whether it was interesting and enjoying. I'm sure it will be. So anyway, without further ado, I'm just going to crack on, and I'm going to start with Andal. Ladies first. So I'm going to stick to that prerogative. And Andal, you've been looking at retail in the APAC region for so many years. What are the key lessons that retailers have learned from this pandemic?
Thank you, Alobi. Very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you on this webinar. And thank you for the opportunity to share some of our thoughts. Just getting back to your question, well, I think the pandemic has now been behind for many quarters now. I think a lot of us seem to be very experienced in what it has thrown. Personally, to all of us, I'm sure you will agree that life has been unpredictable, but we've all also learned to cope with it, adapt to it some way or the other. So I think that's a great lesson and learning for all of us. To the retailers, there is a lot they've gone through. And I think all of you are watching the news, personally experiencing some of these trends. But I'd like just to highlight three of them, very broad trends. The first one is about what sells in these times. The second is about how is the sale happening. And the third is how do I actually gear up to meet whatever is selling. So on what is selling, I think one of the key learnings for the retailers have been that as we've gone through the curve, the pandemic curve, the categories that have been in demand has varied a lot. And I think like there have been stockouts initially of the essentials. Then as we got past that, household categories or home items have been more in demand. So I think it's actually predicting what is selling, understanding the shifts in demand is dynamic. And I think that's a big learning for all the retailers to get it right. The second is about how is it being sold? And I think this is, again, a trend all of us have seen. All of us are adapting more and more to buying online. Physical store access has been limited. And so the retailers have had to learn how to actually give a better experience to the people coming online. The slight difference has been that I think a lot of leading retailers have been at the whole online, selling for a few years now, and it's got accelerated. But the kind of experience that they are giving is a little bit of shift. I think earlier they were looking at the digitally savvy people getting online to buy. Today, everybody, I've never used online buying earlier, but I don't have a choice. So I'm getting on to buy. But the way my savviness as a consumer is very different from someone who's very digitally born. So as a retailer, I think all of us will need to understand the sort of people who are coming on to buy online, and then make it easy for them to shop, give them a very different kind of experience. I think that's been a big learning for a lot of retailers. The third one is about how do I enable whatever I sell. The supply chains have gone completely haywire. So I think it started off with people not knowing where do I get my supplies, questioning is my network strategy right. So I think there has been a lot of that people have gone through. But I think every retailer has come to terms in some way or the other, and they put their own strategies in place, including the processes, the way of forecasting, how do I manage my returns. So a number of areas that's gone through. So I would pretty much categorize the learnings in these three broad areas.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Andal. And just to kind of stretch what you have just said, and I look to Richard for this. From your perspective, Richard, do you think retailers will fundamentally need to reframe and rethink some of their business assumptions going forward? And secondly, just the depressing news coming in from the UK with the Debenhams finally calling it a day and all of that. What's the typical high street in the UK going to look like in this time next year?
Great questions, Malobi. I think the first one about rethinking and working out what the new business model is. I think it's fair to say that retailers have been doing that and thinking about that for the past 20 years, and maybe more in some cases. So that's already been happening. I think what the pandemic has done has changed that thinking to doing. So it's now not just about rethinking the business models, it's about having to live them and really do them and take them on fully. And as you say, we've had a lot of retailers that have gone out of business. Those, I would say, had fundamental issues beforehand, and what the pandemic has done has actually brought that to the fore. So they've actually they were already weak in some way, and so the high street, as you say, is going to look very different next year. We're going to have a lot of gaps in the high street. You know, Debenhams had 100 or so stores. You've got the likes of Arcadia in the UK that have around 500 of various types of stores. So there'll be a lot of gaps in the high street, and also, you know, bigger impact on society as well, because there's a lot of jobs involved with those organizations. So even just talking about Debenhams and Arcadia, that's 500 stores, 25,000 jobs. It's a real significant impact, and we have to reflect that. In terms of what that means for the high street, it's obviously going to change. We've obviously had a large increase in online retailing. So in the UK, for example, online retailing has basically doubled during the first 6 months of this year. But I think we'll end up with two high streets. There is still the role for the traditional retailer, where the purpose of the store is for a good version or an efficient version of distribution. So getting the customers to come to the store rather than having to do that last mile or that last kilometer delivery, which is very expensive. So there'll still be those retailers, and we've seen it this week. In the UK, for example, we've just come out of a second lockdown, and the non-food retailers have just recently reopened. And we had queues outside some of the stores. So Primark, for example, which you'll know, Malobi, and various others will know as well. So those types of retailers, particularly the discount retailers, will still exist, will still be there. But I think for other stores, they will have to up their game in the way that Andel is talking about. How they sell product will have to change. They'll have to improve their experience side of their business, and they will need to reinvent that way. And also there'll be this very different mix between the online and the store. So you've got very long established retailers like John Lewis, department store retailing, who they're looking to the future and thinking that 70% of their sales are going to be online. It's already above 40%, close to 50%. So they are having to think about what's the role of the store, and the store will have to be a place for experience. I'm sure Prashant's going to talk about experience shortly, because Disney are one of the great players in this area. So I think we'll see a very different high street coming out of this and developing over the next few years.
Moving on quickly to Prashant, and so we are just, we talk about retail and online synonymously these days, right? The future is online, the future is artificial intelligence, the future is virtual reality. Everyone's jumping on this whole online bandwagon. I mean, Amazon's profits are, going through the roof is a very prudent way to say it. But at the same time, you're also seeing increasing cases of cybercrime, data thefts, and all of those horror stories. So, what I want you to tell us about is: do you think retailers are doing enough to secure their businesses from, say, a cyber pandemic in the future? Number one. And secondly, if we were to be hit by, say, a cyber pandemic 5 years down the line, what would its effect be on retail business, and what would that cyber pandemic look like? And I know we've had this conversation before, and I've kind of learned the word cyber pandemic from you. So I would love for you to share, some of your insights on that.
Thanks, Malavi. I think that's a very complex question, and then you put up a lot of ingredients into that question, and particularly after such a high-level talk from Andal and Dr. Richard, I think that there's a lot of pressure to kind of put things together. You're right. Particularly with Disney, we are in the online space as well as in the frontline retail sales. But I think to your question, and to kind of club everything together, I would probably like to say that recently there was a survey that was conducted by Fortune, and they wanted to identify the time by which the economic activity will return to the pre-pandemic level. Now, about 14.3% said it would be Q1 of 2021. About 58% said it could be Q1 of 2022, and about 27% said it could be Q1 of 2023. So if you just summarize these numbers, it kind of gives out a very strong message that this current scenario is here to stay at least until 2023. So we are really looking at online for a really long time, at least in the short term, and then of course in the longer term. And of course, due to the pandemic again, we are all seeing an accelerated adoption of digital services, particularly with e-commerce in this context. Now, COVID-related cyber attacks, you mentioned cyber, they have increased from, let's say, about 5,000 per week, which was way back in February 2020, to over 200,000 per week at this point in time. So, and as the pandemic evolved, the businesses began adopting to remote work policies. So video communication platforms like Zoom and Microsoft, they suddenly became a hard target for hackers. So most of these challenges, when the country started to ease lockdowns, we could see the threat actors also increasing non-COVID-19 attacks. That was resulting in about 34% increase in all kinds of cyber attacks globally as compared to last year. So indeed, it's not a safe environment, a safe online environment that we are dealing with. Now, and just to give you a quick perspective on global trends in cyber attacks, there's a new and a dangerous trend rather in the ransomware attacks, which is also dubbed as double extortion attack. Now, this type of attack, it combines encryption of the victim's files along with the threat to publish the stolen confidential information unless you meet their demands. Now, the victims here suffer a double blow as the attackers prevent access to their files and data by encrypting it. But before encryption, some of that content is exfiltrated, and unless the ransom is paid, their sensitive data can be made publicly available. While at the same time, the critical systems remain crippled, which kind of disrupts the day-to-day operations. So I thought this background will probably provide a segue to my next context, to the cyber pandemic, which is a zero-touch economy. And again, this is a new term that's coming through with zero-touch economy, where in these days, what seems like a degree of social aloofness, I think, just for lack of better words, has actually been a bonus during the pandemic. And when we are told to maintain distance from others, we are now increasingly operating in a touchless society, and that's actually changing our buying habits. Something similar to what Richard mentioned, where the online sales are increasing to about 70% from 40%. So the buying habits are indeed changing with the consumer. Now, the whole concept of the zero-touch economy as part of this digital economy has attracted significant attention, especially for its performance during the COVID-19 pandemic, because we are now compelled to kind of go online for many things. So, and the zero-touch economy concept, it's spreading across the spectrum with not just online retailing, but remote working, remote medical treatments with online doctors, online entertainment, particularly for organizations like ourselves, online education, or even smart logistics, to just name a few. And this digital economy is now kind of becoming intertwined with the traditional economy. Now with billions of everyday online connections with people, businesses, devices, data, different processes. So which means we are relying really a lot on the internet, the mobile technology, and of course, the Internet of Things. particularly in online retail. The zero touch economy is more of a self-help business model where machines are now replacing humans in some aspects. We are also seeing an increase in efficiency and the consumer experience with this zero touch economy. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this as the new future of retailing, which apparently seems to be more convenient and efficient. You know? And now if you look at the physical pandemic and then translate that into a cyber pandemic, for example, where internet access is limited or restricted, how quickly are you able to switch back to an analog economy? I mean, even for a temporary period. And there have been instances of cyber attacks to critical infrastructures in some countries. I mean, I wouldn't specifically name countries, but that's pretty adverse for these countries. In case of, let's say, an outage with ISPs or the internet service providers, this digital economy that we are living, particularly with reliance on data or on cloud services, that would definitely be impacted. So to your question on what's the impact going to be, it's going to be devastating. And today, I mean, due to the rapid digitization, I think we all have way too much digital dependency. The number of hours we spend on the internet, and then the dependency on various devices, and of course the bandwidth. So I think in closing, I would also like to share a quick incident where the retail giant Target figured out that a 16-year-old girl was pregnant before her father found out about it. And then why I mentioned this example is, so what happened was Target analyzed data of the consumer purchases, which provided a pattern. Now there was a pattern where women probably in their second trimester were purchasing unscented lotions for some time, and in the first 20 weeks they're buying supplements like calcium or magnesium or zinc. They were able to identify about 25 odd such products that when analyzed together would provide them with a pregnancy prediction score. Why they would do it is then they would kind of send coupons to these consumers, which were timed to the specific stages of pregnancy. Now, this was one such incident where just by the spending, just by the purchasing pattern of the 16-year-old girl, she was analyzed to be pregnant. So just to end this, Malobi, and since you mentioned AI in the context, I suppose we have to be very careful with the online purchasing patterns, as this data can probably be overly used or also misused. I think I'll stop here.
And how much of this conversation that you just had with us and shared with us, I mean, how much of that do you realistically actually have with retailers? Are retailers even thinking about these things, or are they kind of limited in their thinking in terms of, how can I make my website secure and make sure that I'm doing enough to protect data from my, to assure my customers? And, are they really thinking about the big picture? Because, this has been a real, 360-degree turn. Okay, so there's a pandemic, let's all do business online. But are they thinking enough about, 3 to 5 years where the technology is there for their businesses online to actually, shut down in some senses? I mean, I'm going to move on to our second round, but Andal, do you have anything to add to what Prashant says, or, in terms of, are retailers doing enough to think about these issues?
I think definitely, right. With so much data available at that thing, and any hack, any incident means that, like Prashant explained, we have a double whammy as a consumer. Not only am I losing my data, but I'm also subject to being threatened with the data. So I do see a lot of organizations now putting a higher emphasis on security, doing a proper assessment of what is their security landscape is today. And more importantly, define what they should get to, because the level of security protection each organization needs to get to is quite different, depending on how much data they've got, what is sensitive. I mean, an organization like somebody in tech will definitely need a very high level of security compared to someone else, right? So I think they are increasingly doing that. It will take some time for them to be getting on par, but it's going to be an evolving situation, because threat detection and correction is an evolving state. So I do see that happening. I had a slightly different take or a thought on what Prashant was talking about. See, as retailers, they send a lot of campaigns and promotion to consumers. but the consumers are also getting a lot of hooks and campaign and threat, right? But they're also part of subject to cybercrime. So how do retailers make sure that they have the trust and confidence of the consumers and distinguish their real campaigns and targets versus what's the hoax or scam? I think that's as thought. I'll just leave it with all the listeners to reflect on.
Absolutely, and I think that is, with all the incidents of fake news. So we'll actually come back to that in a second. I just want to go back to Richard and kind of move on to the next section. So, we've talked we talk about technology and technology saving us and all of that. But in the wake of this pandemic, what's going to happen to the entire sustainability agenda, right? In the future, I mean, retailers have lost money. They're going to lose money. They're trying to do everything to kind of stitch it back together, and they're going to be focusing on keeping afloat. And what are they, are they going to have time to think about, green issues? What's going to happen to that?
Yeah, really interesting question. I mean, I think the first thing to say is that whilst, yes, retailers are going to need to focus on the bottom line, especially given the stresses of the pandemic, they also recognize that they are part of a wider society. I mean, particularly through stores where they are based in local communities, retailers understand that they are part of that society, and they understand that they have a duty to think about things like sustainability. Having said that, of course, they do need the legal frameworks. They do need help. They do need a level playing field in terms of competition. And so anything that can be done there by governments and so on, I think is important. But we should also recognize that there's both different types of consumers and different types of retailers. And for some consumers, sustainability is really important. And it may be important around specific products. It might not even be in general. So, somebody might think that buying an electric car is really important, but that doesn't mean to say that it's reflected in their food shopping and how the agricultural industry is organized. So I think we have to recognize, first of all, that consumers are different. It's a different priority for different consumers. And also, of course, that there is a financial element to this. So you do have consumers that have enough wealth such that they have full choice, and you have other consumers where the focus is always going to be on price. So we need to recognize that. And in the same way, retailers have different brands, so they will have different priorities as well. And we've seen, a number of retailers like the Body Shop that have built their whole brand around these types of issues. Whereas you'll have other retailers that are really focused on giving price and good customer service to their customers, and the sustainability issue will be less important to them. So I think we've got to recognize that this is a very mixed up area. And that's where the role of governments is actually quite important, because governments help to level that up. So, and they can help retailers focus on priorities. So, for example, we've seen a lot of that with the use of plastic bags, where governments, where they've intervened and put a tax on plastic bags, we've seen massive reductions in the use of plastic bags that are used by retailers. So there's a role for everybody here, consumers, retailers, and wider society through government, to come together in order to meet some of these challenges. But I think going back to what Andel said earlier, one of the interesting things about the pandemic is that we've realized what can happen and how we can change things very, very quickly and at scale, should we wish to. And when all those things are aligned, consumers, retailers, and government, we can make very quick changes. Not easily, it's a huge challenge, but we can actually make them happen. And I think that's one of the things the pandemic has really taught us, is that many things are possible if we all work together, if we all move forward as one. And so we might even see, following the pandemic, an increase in things like government lobbying and so on around issues of sustainability. And I think we'll certainly see governments more likely to intervene, because they have seen the power of intervention. I think the other thing that's interesting around sustainability, and this goes back to my earlier response and also to the things that Prashant was talking about, is how is this sustainability agenda going to relate to online retail growth? Because, you know, delivery of the last mile, for example, is hugely expensive in terms of not only economics, but also environment and so on, or at least it can be if it's not organized in a way that makes it efficient. So I think we're going to have lots of questions around technology, you know, all of the server farms that are, for example, that need cooling and so on. How do we do that in a way that is actually sustainable? So I think as we move into this sort of new era, if you like, those issues are inevitably going to come to the fore, and not just sustainable in environmental terms, but also in social terms. You know, I live down a small road in a village in the countryside in Oxfordshire, but the number of vans that come down this street every hour is amazing. And it's just because people are having all of these online deliveries, and they're generally just one parcel at a time. So I think there's going to be some big questions around sustainability and that last mile in particular.
And just to quickly add to that, Richard, you know, does this create a new opportunity for the small and medium, retailers in local regional communities? Are communities going to look more to their local retailers to support the economy, and, you know, almost a rise of what we call, you know, pardon the academic jargon here, but ethnocentrism, as we say, where, you know, yes, suddenly people feel more loyal to their local products because they feel they need the local economy to, you know, kind of thrive again.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it's one of the issues that the pandemic has taught us, is that local retailing is really important. And we saw that many local retailers actually thrived during the pandemic, have actually done very well. And also they adapted very quickly. They went online very quickly when previously they never had online and so on. So I think you're right. The role of local retailers will become increasingly important. And we should never forget, when we're talking about retailing, that most retailers are small. Most retail companies are SMEs. They are not large corporations.
Thanks very much for that, Richard. And just, you know, again, picking on the technology piece, Andal, you know, again, we are hearing that, you know, supply chains are going to, you know, become more they'll become smarter. There's going to be much more transparency because of the way that technology and information is going to be shared across these new high-tech supply chains. You know, my question is, you know, are retailers going to have money in the next 1 or 2 years to make that transition? Because it was expensive as is even before. I mean, post-pandemic, are we going to see a slowdown in an uptake for these kind of technologies on, you know, blockchain and AI on the supply chain?
Great question, Malobi. I think it's something that needs deep pondering. But before that, I really like to compliment Richard for bringing out the sustainability aspect so beautifully. I think, well done, Richard, very enlightening. See, I think the issues, the areas that you talked about, which is in terms of, you know, more collaboration, transparency in supply chain, has been long wanted, has been on the agenda for a long time for many of the players. But as you rightly said, they've also not taken off because inherently these are extremely complex. There are a couple of organizations which dominate a supply chain, and the cross-sharing information is very hard in those. It's a difficult problem to resolve, even with so much technology available. So I think they have been a bit slow to take off. But then there are other areas that will definitely need investing, which is in terms of sustainability is definitely one. And secondly, sensing demand and making sure that you are actually forecasting correctly and actually getting your supply chain to meet the demand. Those are areas which will definitely need investments in terms of dollars and effort and prioritization of retailers. The question is there money? As I see, the way I am seeing the retailers coping up, I think I put them broadly into two categories. Some are thriving and doing extremely well. I've seen, the sales have rocketed, the profitability is very high. There are some who definitely are and who've really stuck to the brick and mortars are almost coming to a extinction. So the first category definitely are the people who need to pioneer and think of how do I reinvent myself, how do I get ready for the future, and channelize a lot of that funding back to their own growth and gearing up. So I don't see a problem with investment dollars with them. With the second category, definitely, if they do survive and they come back up to life, then they'll have to figure a way on focusing what is going to be their motto. How are they going to reinvent themselves? Are they really going to get into a heavy investment mode? Are they going to go more local, bringing up the factors that were talked about earlier in sustainability? What would their focus be? What is their strength going to be? I think they need to reconfigure their own thinking and come up with their own propositions. But I think a lot of these retailers are also being either taken over or acquired by companies or private equities with muscle. And I think they will definitely have the ability to invest in these areas that are of great need for them to survive in the future. So adaptability is definitely needed, whether it is in investing more transparent supply chains or whether it is in more managing a more efficient supply chain or predicting demand better. I think that, yes, will need to be determined. But I think in either categories of retailers, there will definitely be money to come to invest.
So I'm just very curious. I can make an educated guess who the really successful guys are because we read about them a lot as well. But who are the second category, who are in that kind of gray area?
See, a lot of the people who have been, let's say, fashion, the bigger multi-brand, retailers who were largely reliant on physical brick and mortar stores. And the experience that they gave are heavily impacted. And as you see in most, I live in Singapore, we see one that's been closed quite recently. So in every country, right, that you name, and you will see many, many big brands are really at a very difficult stages. And again, some are surviving, some have adapted, they go online, some are using themselves as dark stores, some are selling out retail space, cutting down, and everyone is following their own ways, right? But whoever survives, because they've been smart to adapt or have been taken over, will, I think, definitely need to carve out investments to gear up to the future. So that's definitely not avoidable.
The road ahead is still quite long and arduous in some ways. It's not as simple as we see in these some of these promotional videos where it all looks very tech savvy and it seems like we're all there, but not quite. So, that's really interesting to hear. I'm just going to ask one more question to Prashant. I can see we've got quite a few interesting questions also from our attendees, so I want to do justice to that. Prashant, just very quickly, again, this is just coming back to the horror scenario, which I always seem to associate back with our conversations. But how smart are blockchain technologies? If you're talking about having entire supply chains networked and very transparent and super secure, if someone can create such a secure technology, surely someone can, break into it and destroy it as well. So, just a couple of thoughts on that.
Sure. And I'll come to blockchain, but something that Dr. Richard mentioned, about the delivery of the last mile, that really picked up my attention. And I would also like to just add a few lines to that. When we were talking about retail, it's constantly evolving. And we are seeing patterns of consumers where in one case, the consumer browses the product online and I'll mention, apparels, fashion. So you browse for a dress online or browse for a suit online. And then you don't make that purchase. You go to the store, try it out, and then you physically make a purchase at the store, but you don't purchase it online. And then there is a second group of consumers who go to the store and then browse for a smartphone or a laptop or a television set. And after shortlisting that product, they come back home and they go on these various online portals and then they buy the same model that they saw at the store, but from the portal that offers the cheapest deals. So, to that point, I think the stores will continue to exist because consumers will walk into the store, even for the experience and also for the products. And there could be a different range of products. And I know we spoke about the smaller SMEs and, where, the mom and pop stores still exist. But then I think there's a market for everybody. I'm not a retail expert, but I'm more of a security expert. But I think based on our conversations within the organization, there is a market for everybody. And again, in my personal experience, just a month ago, I went to buy an Apple Watch at the Apple Store at Orchard Road in Singapore, and they said I need to take an appointment. So I quickly purchased an Apple Watch. I knew what I was going to buy, so I purchased on my phone and it said pick up from the Orchard Store in an hour. So I just grabbed a coffee, went back to the store and bought that Apple Watch. So, the consumer patterns are really strange now in this COVID environment to begin with. But coming to security again, when you're making online purchases, I mean, security has always been a key concern. And especially the payment systems that accompany the online business models, they have always been an issue. And from contactless payments, we've evolved to scanning QR codes and then facial recognition with our smartphones. And I would avoid getting into details of technical security, but particularly from a blockchain standpoint, I feel we are still at a very early stage of payments through the blockchain technologies. And I'm not referring to cryptocurrencies, which are unregulated, but for this group, I would like to talk about the evolution of the digital currency called the central bank digital currency. Now, this will be issued directly by the federal bank. And particularly in Singapore, the Monetary Authority of Singapore plans to implement this digital currency in the near future. So that could be one thing to consider at the back of our minds. And then when you mentioned blockchain, I think Walmart is a great example, and they've been using the blockchain platform for many years. In fact, it was developed by IBM to track the movement of the products. And I think most of us would have heard about the E. coli bacteria outbreak in the United States. And then there are other similar issues that the retailers face, which is like diluted or fake products like milk or fish, grains, or all these organic products. Now, through the blockchain technology, I think the stores are now able to track the source of the product very quickly, and then quickly all the way from the journey from the farms to the packaging to warehousing and directly to the retail stores. I mean, just to give a context, prior to implementing blockchain, Walmart took close to about 7 days to track a product. And any guesses how much time it takes for them now to track a product? They can do it in 2.2 seconds. So from 7 days to 2.2 seconds. I think that this probably answers your question on how smart the blockchain technology is. And then there are several examples I can talk about where blockchain has actually been a business enabler. Besides retail, even the loyalty program by American Express is now moving over to blockchain. And when you're talking about loyalty programs, may not mean much in a conversation, but an average family has several loyalty programs. But how many do we really use? We hardly use half of them. And most of these points that we collect, we never use them. But what is it happening? It's resulting into a loss of billions of dollars to the retailers. So even those of us who use these loyalty programs constantly struggle with issues like cashback or redemptions, which generally take a really long time. So with that, and as you can imagine, things will be much easier with blockchain. And if you heard about StormX, for example, their loyalty program actually allows their users to earn cashback in cryptocurrencies if they shop at Walmart. So then back to the point, particularly for the retail sector, I think Nestle is a good example. It's expanding its food trust technology platform, and so something familiar to all of us, Starbucks. All the Starbucks consumers in the US are now just able to scan a QR code, and they are able to figure out where their coffee bean is coming in from, or even where that coffee bean was roasted. So I think just to kind of give a short answer to your question, I would progressively say that blockchain technology has a huge possibility to be the future of online retail.
So if the retailers can actually cough up the cash and invest in blockchains, then that could potentially be a way forward to perhaps develop some resilience.
Yeah, ROI in terms of return on investments, it's a very small cost with technology. And I mentioned that earlier, that technology is actually taking away the jobs that humans are doing right now. So I think in the long term, yes, if they can kind of invest right now in technology, it will be a huge cost saving going forward.
Great. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, even though it's a long and arduous journey. So all is well, as you would say in Disney, everyone lives happily ever after, or so we would hope.
Yeah, we work in the happiest place on earth, so there's always
yes,
a happiness.
Absolutely. I can see that. You managed to turn cyber pandemic into some beautiful, wonderland of everything will be all right, which is wonderful. Just two more quick questions, and you can answer that in 30 seconds to Richard and Andal, and then I'll take our questions from our panelists. Richard, any tips to retailers to maximize opportunities during the Christmas, this period leading up to Christmas? And likewise, Andal, how do you think Asian retailers would maximize opportunities during Chinese New Year? With all of. So Richard first, and then Andal. That's okay.
Yeah, I mean, just very quickly, I think there is demand there. It's a question of accessing it at the right time. And my only thought would be that retailers need to promote earlier rather than later, because the chances are, so if you take the UK, for example, we've just come out of a lockdown where then the government have opened up the rules for the holiday season so that everybody's going to get together. And that's probably going to lead to some kind of lockdown. So there's going to be this important window where all of that retailing will need to get done. And people are looking for good news, a bit like Prashant was saying. People are looking for good times. So I think there's a real opportunity to get product out there now, get it out there quickly, because in the new year it may not look so good afterwards.
And Andal, do you have any sense of what retailers in Asia are doing to maximize the forthcoming Chinese New Year opportunities in that?
Not particularly, but I think again the focus is going to be on category. What would sell, right? That's going to be the key. And if you look at Chinese New Year, traditionally it's a time of either the bonding of families. They come together, to have very large gatherings and meals, and hotels get booked out during those times. There's the other set of people who are just enjoying the long vacations and they get out and travel. So the travel is closed now. You can't really have large gatherings. So what would then the customers be spending the money on? I think that's when guessing the right categories they would spend on is important.
Okay, that's excellent. I think we've got some really good questions coming from our panelists. So I'm just going to move very quickly to that. And the first one, I'm going to do the first in kind of approach. So this comes from Elizabeth Howard. Richard, I managed to get Elizabeth to attend our session here. She's a Emeritus Fellow at Green Temple College in Oxford University. Thank you, Elizabeth, for that question. And her question is to all the panelists, but perhaps Richard, you have, you can answer it. But she's asking, the pandemic is global and the effects are, similar, but are the effects, the retail effects going to vary by country, do you reckon?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to my earlier points about consumers are at different levels, retailers are at different levels. There are different levels of technology adoption. So, what happens in South is going to be different to what happens in Brazil. And there's different levels of the pandemic itself. So in some countries, the pandemic is having a huge impact on retailing. In other countries, retailers have adapted and there hasn't been that same need to close down stores, etc. So I think, yes, inevitably it's going to vary by country. What I think, though, is fundamental is that the pandemic has forced us all to be much more digital, and not only in retailing. What we're doing now is actually a result of the pandemic, whereas previously, I'd have traveled to Singapore and come and spoken and so on. So it has changed how retailing is going to develop in the future. And I think there's lots of points I could pick up on some of the other questions, but maybe we'll.
Yeah, and actually, just as a follow-up from that, this comes from Jacob Wood, who's the director of SIDBA. He's asking, with the Brexit looming large again, what would a no-deal Brexit mean for retailers in the UK? A double whammy?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, obviously, it depends how the Brexit discussions are going to come out. And it's a parochial issue, curious to the UK. These are just trade talks that are happening in every country with every other country. But this is a particular deadline that has been imposed by the UK on itself. And so there will be repercussions. And many retailers, one of their challenges has been that the date at which that happens is right at the end or in the middle of the holiday season, and it's the biggest period for Christmas sales. And one of their problems has just been, for example, warehousing space, because they've been trying to put aside extra inventory just in case there are issues over Brexit, but actually there's very little space available. So if you've got a warehouse in the UK, you're earning lots of money at the moment.
Okay, I'm really happy to say one of our students have asked a question, so I'm going to ask that to our panelists. This is from one of our final year students, Kanchan Nirmal. Thank you for the question, Kanchan. So she's asking, due to COVID, government and public debts are increasing around the globe, political uncertainties are at rise. How would it impact the future of retailing? So I suppose what she's trying to assess is, with geopolitical tensions, how is that going to affect retail? And perhaps Andal, you have some thoughts on that.
See, I mean, generally, when there's uncertainty in the political environment, people's spending goes down. People start saving more, right? The percentage savings, and I think that is happening. If you see some of the data, I don't have it offhand, but I've been reading some of the data from the Asian consumers. The spending has gone down, and therefore the savings has gone up. Now that means it's not great for retailers, because as retailers, we all would thrive on consumers spending more and more. So I think that is definitely a problem. But I am encouraged to see, though, that there are a lot of governments who are intervening, who are increasing public spending. For example, in Singapore, the government has basically come up with what they call as entertainment coupons for families to just get out and go and visit the local centers here. So I think with such governmental interventions, I'm really hopeful that we don't have too much of curbs in spending.
And this is also, just as a kind of extension of that, do you think countries are going to become more insular, and as a result, consumers are going to be more inward looking and just, focus more on, are we going to see a rise of patriotism, which will reflect in the way people shop? And I know I kind of asked that and I'm repeating myself, but, do you think that would happen? Do you reckon, any of our panelists?
I think no. I think there is.
Okay.
room for
Yeah.
particularly with my
The personal hunch.
international relations and managing geopolitical risks. I really don't see that spill over to that extent. And it could be a temporary knee-jerk reaction, but I don't see it as a long-term issue at all.
Okay, that's again that's good to know in some ways. But
My
actually,
personal opinion is same as Prashant's. Yeah,
okay.
I also feel that it wouldn't. What may be becoming more drive towards locally sourced product could be because of sustainability that Richard also talked about earlier. But I do not think it will be patriotism that will drive it.
And just one more question actually again from Jacob here, which he asked earlier, and perhaps Richard, you can also pick up on this. It's open to all three of you. Are governments doing enough to assist small business retailers in helping them to take the plunge into new digital smart technology platforms, particularly on the payment front?
Yeah, I think in some ways, yes, in some ways, no. One of the things we should first recognize is that small businesses are actually very entrepreneurial. They are very good at adapting. In actual fact, we did some research across Europe a few years back now with one of our colleagues, Malobi Wojciech Petrovic. And one of the things that was interesting about that European research was that small businesses find a way. They adapt, they are flexible, they use technology in very interesting ways, and also very basic ways. So we saw small stores, for example, they would have their own Facebook page, and on Facebook they would have promotions, they would have vouchers, they would have all sorts of things going on, and reflections that they're part of the community. Where I think governments do play a really important role is in terms of infrastructure. And so is there the broadband? Is there the Wi-Fi? Is there the technical infrastructure in that location so that consumers and retailers can thrive? And I think that's where it's more important rather than, specific tools or anything like that. And the same with the payments. The payments, yes, it requires investment, but actually large businesses will work out ways of small retailers being able to use the technology, just as they've done with EPOS systems and so on. So these are big investments for small retailers, but actually if you structure it in a way that works out on a monthly basis or whatever, then you can make that happen. So I think that will happen. The role of government, I think, is much more around this infrastructure. You're on mute, Malobi.
Yes, I am. I finally did it. Just one more question from our students. And again, this is one of our students, Sudhir. I think he's in India at the moment. And his question again, I think it's to all the panelists. What do you suggest, retailers do to maximize opportunities for consumers in the, the kind of bottom of pyramid, as we call them, even in a post-pandemic situation? Is that business model going to change dramatically, or, are retailers going to struggle with that segment, or is that an opportunity for them to capitalize? Because, obviously the way they market is much more frugal and products are cheaper. So I suppose he is asking, will retailers be able to sustain their businesses in those kind of rural areas in a post-pandemic situation?
I think it's very, very appropriate question, and it's really I would say a grave question also, because you do see that is the pyramid, bottom of the pyramid, which is most impacted today. And I think to an extent the question is also fair. It says MNCs who come in and organize all of these e-commerce are the ones making the profit, but not everything is going down. They have an undue power over these smaller players. I think the only way is I hope the retailers who are big enough take a view of giving back, right, and take care of people, their suppliers, which I think a lot of the broad, if you look at the consumer goods industry, just take the panel, a lot of them are very concerned about their suppliers. They've relaxed the payment terms for their suppliers. They have extended, they're giving a lot more soft to their suppliers because they are able to withstand this. So I hope the large retailers are also able to do that. And also, I think encouragingly, I'm seeing pockets of emergence of non-profit organizations which are bringing, let's say, the farmers or the traditional craft makers together to promote and give them some kind of livelihood. I hope that movement takes a lot more momentum, and that comes back. And of course, I'm really hoping that the pandemic gets over quickly, so all of us can get directly to those guys. So, go get question.
Yeah, thank you, Sudhir, for that. Again, I'm really pleased that our students have really, managed to take time out and ask questions. I'm very pleased for that. And I promise this is the final last question, and then we'll end the session here. This comes from Dr. Thirumaran, who's the academic head here in JCU, and my boss as well. He's asking, what are some of the opportunities for businesses making money during COVID-19, continuing and sustaining that money-making streak post-COVID when other businesses start to bounce back? So are we going to see their profits skyrocketing, or is that going to be a plateau as the others kind of take over and re-emerge from the ashes, as they say? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I do think that yes, this is a temporary change. Obviously, hopefully we are beginning to. Hopefully, we're at the beginning of the end of the pandemic now that some vaccines have been created and so on. But I do think this is different to 9/11 or to the financial crisis, in that there has been a fundamental shift. And that fundamental shift is about moving online, and a number of, and a lot of that won't necessarily go back. And I think that is a fundamental shift because and it reflects the previous question about the farmers in India, because what it is meaning is that those involved in the technology and the way in which all of this is brought together, mentioned Malobi, Amazon's sales over the past year, they are becoming very, very important. And what you can see, and what I think will happen, is that in order to make sure that suppliers are not abused, and in order to make sure that, going back to the patriotic perspective, in order to ensure that there's not just 3 or 4 Chinese or American companies that are dominating the whole of retailing, I think inevitably there will be some kind of restrictions or some kind of taxation or something that is placed on those type of organizations. So I do think, yes, this is different, but there will be things that go forward that are related to that. And I think that brings up Barry's point as well, that we haven't had time to answer, around China being ahead in terms of e-commerce. And I think there's a lot of learnings there that we can also again understand. And again, China are struggling with the domination of a few big players.
I think thanks very much for that, Richard and Andal, and of course Prashant. I think we are out of time now. We started 3 minutes late, and we've ended about 7 minutes later. So thank you all very much, and thank you to all the attendees. I think we had about 47 or 48 participants. So thank you, everybody. I hope this has been insightful. I've learned definitely a lot. We've covered a wide range of issues, and perhaps there'll be another version a year down the line, when we come out of it and finally see what it's all looking like. So thank you all very much again for your time, for taking time out of your diaries. I know you're extremely busy people. Thank you to our marketing team for organizing this and making it all rather seamless, and all our participants who attended, and my colleagues, and especially our students who managed to come in and ask such good questions, which I wish they would also ask in the lectures. So perhaps I need to organize more panel discussions, but I'm really proud that they came along. So I think with that, we're going to end this session. And as I said, I will share the recording with all of you. And if there is any kind of thought piece that any of us write out, we will run it by all of you to make sure you're happy with it. And I welcome you to co-author anything that you would like with myself or Richard, or amongst yourselves. I think there's a lot to learn. So thank you very much. Have a good evening. Stay safe. Happy Christmas. Happy New Year. And I will be in touch with all of you shortly. And again, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vallabhi.
Thank you very much. Thanks.